today we're gonna really kind of take a moment to review all the various ways in which Richard Rohr could be accused of heresy, or more to the point that he's challenging the church in some important and significant ways. And that's really the more interesting topic, is where is he asking us to go? Where is he drawing us as a faith community? If we were to follow his advice, we're gonna kind of review all of that, get some input from you guys as we go along. Specifically, then we'll finish up with the last chapters, and Chris will lead us in a closing meditation, and it's going to be good. First of all, of course, as we said in session 1, Richard Rohr is a good example of a non-dual spiritual teacher. That means he has an experiential approach that kind of comes out of a contemplative experience. As you will recall, we quoted Thomas Merton, who talks about this when he talks about contemplation as a more profound depth of faith, a knowledge too deep to be grasped in images, in words, or even in clear concepts. For in contemplation, we know by unknowing, or better, we know beyond all knowing or unknowing. So it's really important to keep that perspective when we're talking about Richard Rohr. The non-dual experiential approach suggests that God is not a what, not a thing. Rohr says that's precise, or Merton says that's precisely one of the essential characteristics of contemplative experience. It sees that there is no what that can be called God. There is no thing as God, because God is neither a what nor a thing, but a pure who. He is the thou before whom our inmost I springs into awareness. And Thomas Keating affirms this, as he says, centering prayer is not just sustained attention to a special word or image or to one's breathing, but the surrender of one's whole being to God. So we're talking about ego death. We're talking about giving away that thing that is the filter or the barrier between reality and our direct experience of it. Then we talked a little bit about heresy. What is heresy? And I'm tempted to remind us of a very interesting book by the sociologist of religion, Peter Berger, who wrote a very important book called The Heretical Imperative. Basically, he says, the original root word of heresy comes from the Greek meaning to choose for oneself. That in the modern context, we are all heretics because none of us have any option, any choice but to choose. We have to choose our religious affiliation, our religious identity, our worldview, because we're presented with so many different worldviews. We have no choice but to choose one that's right for us. That makes us all heretics in Peter Berger's eyes. I think that's true. That's the modern condition. In light of that, does it even make sense to use the word heretic these days? Does anybody even care, right? And it goes to this fundamental issue that we talk about a lot here at Trinity Cathedral, the distinction between belief and trust, that Christianity maybe is not so much all about believing the right ideas, concepts, and truth claims, but rather Christianity is, along with all other great contemplative faiths, about engaging reality in a trusting, open heart. That there's no need to lay out these barriers of correct thinking or correct belief, that that's just a fool's errand. And besides that, if the Pope won't declare Richard Rohr a heretic, who can? You know, who are we to call him a heretic if the Pope won't? So, I mean, really, that's just the way it is. And also, and finally, maybe we need a few good heretics these days, right? That the Christianity has benefited from good heresy in the past, such as Luther. Let's see if I can get this out of the way here. We'll remember in session 2, we had a conversation with this guy, Douglas Cruthus, a grumpy Cruthus. He's just sort of a grumpy guy. Grumpy. Sorry, I shouldn't make fun of it. He's a very, very smart guy and very much smarter than me, that's for sure. Anyway, he accuses Rohr of basing his teaching primarily on Eastern mysticism rather than biblical Christianity, as if those are an either or thing. He counsels us to find our true self instead of knowing a savior distinct from the self, as if that's an either or thing. And his teaching on contemplative prayer emphasizes letting go of thoughts instead of focusing our thoughts on Christ. So this is the reason I spent so much time on this guy, Douglas Cruthus, is that he does express evangelical Christian concerns quite directly and well. If in fact you cannot trust reality enough to let go of your thoughts and be present to reality, trusting that in that experience, God will speak, then, you know, maybe it's better not to try. Maybe you should be an evangelical Christian. But for those of us who find reality to be deeply trustworthy, as if, you know, really, actually, do we have an alternative to reality? You know, so we might as well open ourselves to it. Then Rohr is our guide. Is he a panentheist, and is panentheism a heresy? As you recall, Rohr says, everything that exists in material form is the offspring of some primal source which originally existed only as spirit. This infinite primal source somehow poured itself into finite visible forms, creating everything from rocks to water, plants, organisms, animals, human beings, everything that we see with our eyes. Is that heresy? Or is that Genesis chapter 1? Right? It's definitely the Tao Te Ching. Yes, that's true. Thank you. It is. This idea that Rohr is very unapologetic around, and some people might say this is kind of an innovation on his part, or at least he's being kind of more blunt about this than most theologians would be, that there are actually 2 incarnations. The first incarnation, which is the creation where spirit becomes matter, and the second where Jesus comes into the world or rises from the world, which is a beautiful way of thinking of it. Is that heresy? I don't know. I don't think so. Not yet, anyway. But it's really just a different way of expressing John, the gospel, the prologue to John's gospel. It's really just that. Our friend Cruthus says Rohr wants to take what only Christ, the God-man, possesses and extend it to humanity. In other words, Christ is not unique in that way. And is Christianity dependent upon Jesus Christ being completely unique? Is it a heresy to suggest that maybe Jesus Christ being, it's not enough that he discloses the reality of the human life? It's not enough that he illustrates what it would look like if God became flesh? It's not enough that he discloses the meaning of life? It's not enough that his teaching is wisdom itself and the key to all purpose and truth for those who go into that path? That's not enough. He has to also be ontologically distinct and unique. That's a very hard-held, tightly gripped idea for a lot of Protestants. Is that necessary for Christianity? And I would suggest maybe not. Certainly not in the Episcopal Church. There's lots of room for that in the Episcopal Church, I would say. Is he a materialist? Well, yes, he is a materialist, along with Judaism and Islam. This is Cruthus that's saying, that's making this claim about monotheism, which I think is debatable. But Cruthus says monotheism takes God to be separate from the created world in his being. And Rohr definitely disagrees with that and says there's no separation between God and reality. So we have to, on that one, just decide for ourselves, which do we think is more true? I have a hard time distinguishing God from reality. I don't know what God is, if not reality myself. So we'll have to think on that one. Well, then what is sin? This is a problem for Cruthus and many Protestants. Rohr says we should contemplate this idea. I've never been separate from God, nor can I be, except in my mind. This cuts against the grain of the biblical understanding of the fall and sin and undermines the biblical account of salvation. Well, what would Christianity look like if we let go of that idea? What would Christianity look like if we embraced the notion that there is no separation from God and cannot ever be separation from God? Jean Marie.
Paul in Romans says there is no separation.
He says what?
Paul in the book of Romans says there is no separation. There could never be.
Yeah, Rohr quotes Paul quite a lot. And yeah, thank you. Well put. What about original sin? Isn't that a doctrine of the church that we need to accept? Well, it also depends on your interpretation of what original sin is. Bryce Andrew Sibley, as you will recall, says, if original sin is nothing more than a tragic flaw or shadow side, if original sin is not seen from the perspective of the fall from grace, then the just penalty due for that, and hence the necessity of salvation of Christ, his message, his death and resurrection are all meaningless. In other words, if we're not ontologically alienated from God and trapped in this prison, which is the world, which is filled with sin, then why would we need, if we're not trapped in that dark world, then why would we need Christ to come along and free us? So it's another one of those if-then logical statements that betrays the experience of Christ in the world, and also the experience of Christ leading us out of our limited, separate consciousness into full knowledge of God in our bodies, in this material world. Then, as you recall, we had this gorgeous conversation about Eddie Hillison. And I just think it's worth calling up her words again. Everywhere, things are both very good and very bad at the same time. The two are in balance everywhere and always. That does sound like Taoism too, right? I never have the feeling that I've got to make the best of things. Everything is fine just as it is. And she's saying this from the concentration camps. Every situation, however miserable, is complete in itself and contains the good as well as the bad. You remember her reflection on watching the birds in flight and these two elderly ladies sitting down for a chat, and all around them, mass murder. That capacity to see the good, even in the midst of death and evil, is, evidence of clarity of sight. And, I keep this invitation to put ourselves imaginatively into the experience of birds and dogs, cats, other animals who don't have self-consciousness, don't have self-pity. I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself, D.H. Lawrence says. To imagine what it's like to have the suffering that we have, but not have an ounce of self-consciousness about it. To never say, why is God letting this happen to me? Why am I being punished? What is the meaning of my life now? To
Did the
be.
lion catch me because of those mean things I said to my sister when I was a kid?
Yeah. And then, you could continue with this inquiry with Rohr. What does he mean? But he says up is down and down is up. Remember this quote from Jung, my pilgrim's progress has been to climb down 1,000 ladders until I could finally reach out a hand of friendship to the little clod of earth that I am. What is that all about? I thought we're supposed to be going up to God, not down. And then he beautifully brings in his friend Ken Wilber when he says, Ken Wilber and I both trust the descending form of religion much more. And I think Jesus did too. Here, the primary language is unlearning, letting go, surrendering, serving others, and not the language of self-development, which often lurks behind our popular notions of salvation. That explains the miles of bookshelves in the local bookstores on self-improvement. Unless we're careful, we will again make Jesus's descending religion into a new form of climbing religion, as we have done so often before. And I think about, how we see that in so many spiritual groups and religious groups where, to prove that you really get the guru's message, there are certain signifiers, certain ways of dress, certain postures, certain asanas, certain practices that you got to display in order to be in the in-group, in order to show that you also are awakened, you get it, you're enlightened. All of that is in the opposite direction of what this model is leading us to, which is give up all of that. I mean, it's good to have good posture when you're meditating. It's good to have good asana, but for the right reasons, which is to lose yourself to God, to love God so completely that you no longer exist. That's the only reason. Does he deny the resurrection? He goes into a a frighteningly metaphorical language here that some Christians would find uncomfortable. He talks about terms like springtime, regeneration, healing, forgiveness as metaphors for the resurrection. Why doesn't he just come out and say it? Jesus was dead. He was a corpse for 3 days, and then he came back to life and astonished, and it was a miracle. Why doesn't he say that? You know, and is that necessary for Christian faith? I don't think it is necessarily anymore. Many of the great teachers of the last 50 years have been encouraging us to get more, to go deeper with the resurrection. Rohr himself says, our endless attempts to prove a supernatural event are misguided from the start because neither Christ nor Jesus is outside of our natural reality in the first place. You don't have to rely on supernatural miracles in order for God to be alive and at work, right? It will really help you, Christian or not, if you can begin to see Jesus and Christ as coming out of reality, naming it, giving it a face, not appearing to reality from another world. Can we live with that as a Christian thesis? Does he disavow the creeds? He has quite an interesting section on the creeds. The Apostles' Creed, he says, does not once mention love, service, hope, the least of the brothers and sisters, or even forgiveness. Anything actually that is remotely actionable. You get the sense that if it were up to Rohr, he would throw out the Apostles' Creed and give us a different creed that has something to do with what we're called to do in this world, or how we are called to be, or how God in physical reality transforms us into more loving beings as we trust and give ourselves to that reality. Well, does that make him a heretic? I mean, he's saying the Apostles' Creed's not very useful, and you know, he's not the first one to say it's mythological language. Whenever we start taking the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed as literal historical truth about an objective reality that happened, you know, we're missing the point. We're thinking like 20th century modernists or 19th century modernists, not like first century Christians or Jews. And we're failing to take into account the purpose that the creeds played, the role that the creeds played in the formation of the early church was to define the faith and to comfort Constantine in his need for national security. Because all these Christians were arguing with one another, they couldn't seem to agree on anything, and that was threatening to the empire. Look, bishops, just figure it out. Come up with a single idea. Stop with your divisiveness. So they did. Yes, Michael.
Another way to say it is that the theologians of that day were answering questions that were important at that time.
Yes.
We don't have those questions.
Thank you, Michael. Yes. The theologians and the bishops of that time were answering questions of that time in the language that made sense to them. And those are not our questions now. Right. Thank you, Michael. Well put. Thank you. Does Richard Rohr say that God is female? Well, actually, he's particularly psychological and symbolic as he talks about Mary as an archetype. He doesn't go, I didn't see him going anywhere near suggesting, for example, that Mary is a semi-divine or divine being, as Catholic teaching now declares her to be, basically. We say we're monotheistic, and yet we have Mary, the mother of God, who floats around the universe free of time and space and heals people. So I think we're on, orthodoxy is not threatened by Richard Rohr's approach to the divine feminine. It's pretty straight ahead, I think. What about that he says his dog has Christ nature or Buddha nature? As you will recall, he says, honestly and without any stretch, my dog Venus taught me more about real presence over a 15-year period than any theological manual ever did. Does that make him a heretic? No, because he's saying his dog is a teacher for him. He's not saying that Jesus inhabits. Well, he is. He's not saying that Jesus inhabits his dog, but he is saying that Christ inhabits his dog, just as Christ inhabits this cup of tea and what I had for breakfast this morning. So, does he deny the cross? I think he's beautifully interpreting the cross. This is the real meaning of crucifixion, he says. The cross is not just a singular event. It's a statement from God that reality has cruciform pattern. And this is essential to his whole thesis. Jesus was killed in a collision of cross purposes, conflicting interests, and half-truths, caught between the demands of an empire and the religious establishment of his day. The cross was the price Jesus paid for living in a mixed world, which is both human and divine, simultaneously broken and utterly whole. He hung between a good thief and a bad thief, between heaven and earth, inside of both humanity and divinity, a male body with a feminine soul, utterly whole and yet utterly disfigured, all the primary opposites. In so doing, Jesus demonstrated that reality is not meaningless and absurd, even if it isn't always perfectly logical or consistent or comfortable or free of suffering or ironic, and I love this description of the cross, of this, the way in which the cross communicates this deep joy and sorrow at the heart of being human. Yeah, Chris.
Sharon Drew.
Sharon.
Question online.
Good.
Hi,
Hi, Sharon. Go ahead.
Sharon Drew, Matthew.
Thank you, Sharon Drew.
All right, I have 3 things to challenge you on, but of course you know I would. One, according to philosophy and neuroscience, reality is all subjective, and the only way we have of interpreting the world is by the circuits in our brain that interpret everything. And therefore, reality is subjective. So I just put that out, first of all. Second of all, I have been to dozens and dozens of churches around the world where Mary is the God that's prayed to, not Jesus. So I think there is a case to be made that not only is Jesus God, Mary is God, and then that makes us all God, which I also think is the corollary of that. That's what Jesus said, I am you. So it makes us all God. And next,
Well, hold on, Sharon Drew. Let me just
okay.
address that. I think, first of all, I don't think Richard Rohr would argue with you about your thing about Mary. That's indeed his point as well. Although he's less apt to use the word God for Mary if that were to give Mary ontological status above anyone else. But certainly Mary is a conduit for God, just as his dog is.
No, you can't. You can't compare Mary to God, to a dog.
No, I agree. Actually, I agree.
I also think that, again, I'm not a Christian, so please, if I'm really harming anyone, I'm sorry. But I really do believe that we're all one. I guess that's my Quakerism and my Buddhism, but for me, we're all one, and that Jesus said, "I am you." And I don't see a difference. Again, I'm not a Christian, so sorry.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly what Richard Rohr is saying, that there's no separation, that in fact, God is inseparable from all of us.
So therefore inseparable from Mary as well. So where you put God above, you put Jesus above, you put Mary above, and you put me above and you above. I think it's the same. That's just, again, non-Christian, sorry. And I also think that God put Jesus exactly at the time he wanted to put him there, with what happened and with the death and the way he died, just like he put you where he wanted you and me where he wanted me. And I believe that it wasn't a mistake that he died when he died, the way he died, that it was all created by Creator.
And why is that belief important to you?
Because otherwise we end up either making somebody or something a victim, or a victim of happenstance. And I think it's much more powerful than that. I think Creator put each one of us where we're meant to be this lifetime, to interpret that part of Creator that Creator couldn't do him or herself. And that we spend our lives traveling between our God self and our personality doll, which is our ego self. And we keep trying all our lives to be better and better, to represent and offer what we were given at our best to bring into the world. And I think we were given that. We were each given that unique gift of interpreting God Creator's will, just as Jesus was. And I don't think any of us are here by mistake.
Okay. That's a whole another conversation, but Sharon Drew, thank you for that. And what was that first point again? It was about
That there is no reality.
oh yeah. So what Richard Rohr would say is that I believe what he would say is that you said what I heard you say is that the brain is the organ by which we interpret reality. Without our brain, we wouldn't be able to experience reality. Sure, but what Richard Rohr is trying to do is help us to experience reality beneath interpretation. That is, when someone gives you a hug, you're feeling that on a level before your brain starts to interpret it. When we feel loved, when we get hit upside the head with a 2x4, we are experiencing something prior to the interpretation of it. And that experiential immediacy with reality is itself disclosive of God. It discloses the ways in which we are not separate from God. So I don't want to get too into the weeds.
We'll have an argument about that at some time over coffee.
Okay, thanks, Sharon Drew. Chris, there was somebody else.
Yes, although I don't see her hand anymore.
Claudia.
Yeah, there you are.
Go ahead, Claudia.
I was just going to take issue too with how it sounded like what Sharon Drew said in that first part, and that is that there is no reality other than with our brains. And I would just say that I think, at least from Richard's perspective, there is a reality, but our brains are what we use to interpret a lot of things. But he believes there's a way to get below that,
Yes.
to experience it. So I'm really just repeating what you said, but that was all I was going to say.
Yeah, and the heart of that is that in the contemplative experience, we're recognizing that our brains are actually separating us from reality as often as they are bringing us closer, because we have our filters, we have our egos, we have the things that we choose to pay attention to, the things we don't pay attention to. There's confirmation bias, and there's beliefs that really correspond not so much to reality as to what the belief that we need to have in order to feel better about life, and and to get through the day, and to for some of us that means othering others, hating Republicans, hating Democrats, hating the traffic jam in front of us. Those are all ways in which our brain is separating us from reality rather than joining us to it. Let's keep moving. Thank you, Claudia. So Richard says, we are indeed saved by the cross more than we realize. The people who hold the contradictions and resolve them in themselves are the saviors of the world. And I think back to Eddie Hillesum again. They are the only real agents of transformation, reconciliation, and newness. Those people who are not reacting to all of the typical divisions of life, but rather embracing the whole and showing how to hold those contradictions and resolve them in ourselves. Is he a Buddhist? He does actually claim to have learned something from Buddhism, which is refreshing in a Christian. I always say that there's nothing about being a Christian that means that we don't have anything to learn from other religions. Please, we have so much to learn, and Buddhism has taught us so much about, for example, non-attachment, freedom from full or final loyalties to human-made domination systems. Non-attachment is the best way I know of protecting people from religious zealotry or any kind of antagonistic thinking or behavior. There's nothing to be against, but just keep concentrating on the big thing you are for. Concentrate on the big thing you are for. The other day, I found myself saying something that was kind of embarrassing self-disclosure to a very good friend of mine. And she said, "How are you so undefended?" And I said, "What is there to defend?" And that is the question for us all. What is there to defend? What are we defending? What are we protecting? Does he undermine the church? He seems to be critical of the church in some ways. Christians are not leaving Christianity as much as they are realigning with groups that live Christian values in the world instead of gathering to again hear the readings, recite the creed, and sing songs on Sunday. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who said she stopped going to church when she started seeing what Christianity was doing in the world in terms of its conservative politics, its repressive sexual mores, its all the damage that conservative Christianity has done to the world. And let's be honest, progressive Christianity has done damage as well. And she said to me, I feel a little bit of I'm not quite at ease with the fact that I left the church. It still kind of bothers her that she left the church. And I had to say to her, you left the church for the most Christian of reasons. You left the church looking for a Christian community because you weren't finding it in church. Actually, good for you. And that's what Richard Rohr is saying as well. If you're not finding Christian community in church, find a different church is what I would say. And they're out there. Because it is true that you can find a place where your soul is seen and loved just exactly as you are, and where your spiritual path is challenged and deepened and honored and nurtured and educated, and where you are included as a full equal, no matter what you look like or what nationality you have or blah, 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 blah. Those churches exist. I know because I work at one. And he says, remember, it's not a brand name that matters. It is that God's heart be made available and active on this earth. Amen. But I have to say, if everybody goes along with that, I may be out of a job, and I'm not so happy about that. So for institutional self-preservation and for my own dental insurance, I ask you, stay with the church. This is the priestly rule here. Yes, Michael.
I think another good point that might be important to make is that even within the Episcopal Church, there are folks who are very committed to a dualistic understanding of Christianity, and some very conservative view of that. And what I think Rohr is looking for, and what this cathedral is looking for, and I would be looking for, is simply a place for those of us who experience God and Christ differently.
Yes.
And want to say that particular way has some merit, but so does ours.
Yes.
And we deserve a place at this Christian table.
Thank you, Michael. Beautifully put. Yes, there's nothing wrong with finding a community that speaks your language. And obviously, I mean, I've known many very, very good people for whom evangelical Christian language, conservative Christian language has saved their lives and kept them from addiction and helped them to love their children and their spouses and be better citizens in the world. There's nothing wrong with that. And that, if that's your language, then that's the community you need to be in. As long as it's drawing you into deeper love, go with God. And there's another way of going about it, as you said, Michael. Thank you. Is he a Pelagian? Pelagian is one of the early great heresies of the church. Augustine famously went after this guy, Pelagius, who came, they say, from the British Islands into the Roman Empire, into Rome itself, and started saying to people, you have God inside you. There is nothing broken inside you. There is no sin inside you. You are good the way you are. And he started going around to he had a special touch with very wealthy aristocratic ladies. And he had them giving away their estates and giving the money to the poor, directly to the poor, and living communally with him in this ashram of sorts, where they practiced very austere, difficult spiritual practices. He was like the first Christian guru. Unfortunately, there was a flip side to Pelagius, which is that he said, because there's nothing wrong with you, and you have no sin within you, and in fact, you have God within you, you have no excuse for not being perfect. And if you're not perfect, if you're not living up to your inner perfection, guess what? You're going to hell. That's the part of Pelagius that we never talk about. Pelagius has been kind of smoothed over and romanticized, but he was incredibly harsh on people who didn't quite meet the mark. Augustine was fighting for the people who didn't quite meet the mark and saying, what about the rest of us? Isn't there salvation available to us? And isn't God's grace big enough to save even me, a wretched sinner? And to say that actually we're all just normal, ordinary folks, and we all sin, we all screw up, and there is grace for us. So Augustine's doctrine on original sin is not quite as offensive as a lot of people think of it as being. He was saving salvation for the rest of us, is what he was doing. Anyway, so Pelagius got declared a heretic after Augustine insisted that the military might of the Roman Empire be brought to bear against him and had him exiled and declared a heretic. And that's Augustine's sin, right? But since then, the term Pelagianism has been used to signify people who say, you know, you've got work to do. You can't just sit around and wait for God to save you. You got to do some work yourself. Here's some spiritual practice that you could do. It takes effort. That is construed as saying salvation by works, as opposed to salvation by faith, which is how it all got characterized in Luther's time. But a more nuanced understanding is to say, yeah, we all do have our work to do. We do have a path that we're called to. And reality has a beautiful feedback loop where once we go on the path and start doing the work, God starts responding and starts showing us the way, and starts healing our traumas and our wounds, and starts creating salvation within us, a lived, felt sense of being loved by God, right? And there's nothing wrong with that feedback loop. That's what we're invited into. So whether it's meditation, contemplation, centering prayer, chosen solitude, some form of practice is recommended by Rohr. Does that make him a heretic? No, I don't think so. But it is taking the wisdom of Buddhism, among other faiths, to say, you know what, Christians have been pretty lazy. We've thought that if we can just contort our brains into some kind of place where we can believe the right ideas about Jesus, then we've done our work. That's not, I mean, that might work for you. Certainly it works for some, but it's only a start. I think I would agree with Rohr on that. Is the Agnostic another one of the great early heresies of the church? Some might say the first, because he does talk a lot about knowledge of God, about knowing God. He speaks of a certain kind of knowing, which is experiential and contemplative. Some would say that's Gnosticism and get their hackles up. But I think he's correct in saying Gnosticism, one of the problems with Gnosticism is that this knowledge of God was all tied up in information, esoteric, insider access to mystery cult type weird practices and religions and secret sayings and special insider knowledge information, but it's not about the experience of God felt on a deep physical level. Knowing in the Jewish sense of physical realization. So I think he's safe on that one. He has this natural religion though, you know, and this is very Catholic. In this, he's very Orthodox. He points to Paul, who says, even the pagans can point to the substance of the law that is already written on their hearts, that we can trust reality to disclose to us the ways of God. And not just Christians, but any living being can begin to see those patterns of life and death, love and hate, separation, unity. There's a constant movement of loss and renewal at work in this world at every level. It seems to be the pattern of all growth and evolution. To be alive means to surrender to this inevitable flow. It's the same pattern in every atom, in every human relationship, and in every galaxy. Right? That the laws of the physical universe apply to every galaxy. That's how universal Christ is. Native peoples, Hindu scripture, Buddha, Moses, Muhammad, and Jesus all saw it early in human history and named it as a kind of necessary dying. So these truths are available to us all. And he concludes with this beautiful piece. All of us travelers, each in our own way, have to eventually learn about letting go of something smaller so something bigger can happen. That's not a religion. It's highly visible truth. It's the way reality works. Yes, I'm saying that the way things work and Christ are one and the same. What do you think of that? Does that strike you as obvious or profound? Tony? Both?
Well, when I read this, it reminded me of something I hear in recovery rooms, that we give up something smaller, we give up our addictions to gain something much larger, which is, the world, sanity, spiritual connection. And so, it made perfect sense to me, and certainly, it's being in recovery is a spiritual. That's the solution.
Yeah. Richard Rohr has, you've probably seen his work on 12 steps, has a beautiful interpretation of 12-step programs that I think is just stunning. And this is a big part of it, right? You give up what's small in order for what's big, in order to enter into what's bigger. We have a few minutes before we move into our closing meditation, and I just want to put it out there for the floor. If anybody has any concluding thoughts you want to offer? David Mitchell, I know you got things going on. I love your icon.
I do. Ah. Well, I noticed we didn't get to the harrowing of hell last week.
Oh, yes, right.
And I would actually put forth that we could go further than what Rohr talks about. That, let's say we see someone who's going through a dark place, going through hell. What's the thing to do? Not talk at them like Job's friends. The thing to do is go there with them. To be, in that sense, what Christ would do.
Yes, exactly right. Thank you, David. I bet you know that because you've experienced it yourself.
Yeah. Both directions.
Yeah, both directions. Gets to my professor back in 1980 when I was in seminary the first time before I dropped out. And whenever anybody made a theological statement, he would say, "How do you know that?" And they would say, "Well, because of this." And, "Well, how do you know that is true?" "Because of this." "Well, how do you know that is true?" And ultimately, it would be frustrating for the interrogatee, but finally they would have to come to some experience they had that convinced them of some element of reality being real. And that's ultimately what all religious language is. It's just a shorthand way of talking about our experience. And as soon as it becomes divorced from that, it's in danger of spinning off into unreality.
Pat,
Yeah.
this is I think what Descartes discovered, which gets trivialized into, I think, therefore I am. He actually set out on a quest to just ask, what can actually be known to be true about anything, beginning with anything you've ever been taught, anything that involves your particular language or time and history and everything, and he whittled it all down, even God. He realized that in the end, what could not be denied is that the experience of sitting there and realizing, holy moly, I can't know that anything is true. That was actually happening. You cannot deny that you're having the experience that you're currently having.
Right, right. And so he might have actually been a little bit more on the ball if he had said, I experience, therefore I am. That might have been a little bit more helpful.
The original Latin might be a little more broad in
Yeah.
its that's
No, I doubt it. Cogito.
yeah, it's not
Cogito.
as strictly intellectual. Who knows?
Good. Well, thank you.
Yes.
He was a scientist and a groundbreaking one. Thank you, Chris. Did you guys hear what he said? The Zoomers? Not really. So Chris was saying that what Descartes was getting at was that in the end, when you keep interrogating your own experience, finally, the only thing you can know for sure is that you're experiencing it. That's the only ultimate truth. I experience, therefore I am. Or as he said, I think, therefore I am. But I think that's what he was getting at. Yeah. Thank you. Who else? Oh, I'm so tempted to just pick on some of my favorite people here. Tobin, what do you?
We know who your favorites are.
Yeah, well, Tobin Weaver's one of them. Tobin, what do you think of this whole thing so far?
Well, I missed the last couple of sessions, so I don't feel super qualified, but I would like to make a comment on the 12-step thing that you said about giving up something small for something bigger.
Yeah.
There's another part to that, which is trusting that God will have your best, look out for you no matter what.
UI server. Low
The trust,
battery.
Go ahead.
the trusting God in that whole process. I mean, you don't necessarily know what the bigger thing is, but just trusting God.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So there was a saying, I'm a 12-stepper. There was a saying that God never says no. He only says, not now, yes, or no, but I have something better in mind for you. Like that's kind of the mindset that people hold, and it's a good mindset.
Yes, thank you, Tobin. Yeah, yeah. Who else has got some insights? Just how has this class been for you? What have you gotten out of it? What has resonated with you? What has not? Do you really care that he's a heretic or not? I bet most people really don't. But what has resonated with you? Michael Flanagan, I know that you've got some resonances going on.
Well, I know I'm not one of your favorites, so I don't know why I got called on. I was wondering, I was listening to a Q&A of a Cistercian talking in Rome a couple of weeks ago, and Richard Rohr called in on the Q&A from wherever he lives in the States. And the question he was asking about to this Cistercian who was giving a talk on St. Francis of Assisi was whether this Sultan in what's now the Ottoman, or was the Ottoman Empire, that world, St. Francis of Assisi apparently traveled there and was trying to explore a dialogue with the Muslim world, which I didn't know. But this Sultan was so impressed by St. Francis that he gave him something that's now a relic in Assisi.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Rohr called in to ask him something like, do you really believe that it was? Or is this a relic that was produced after the fact and then considered as such? And I thought, he's speaking of a reality that we all know, but he's not leaving much room for it for something that's also part of our faith. And that's what I miss a little bit in him, is that sort of medieval mystical side. He doesn't seem like he's a heretic. He seems like a very nice man. But I feel something's missing. It may not be missing for other people. He may be the great door opener for others. I don't know.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I think Richard Rohr is really trying hard to bring two worlds together, you know, and trying to speak the language of the unchurched and the barely churched and the disenfranchised, trying to speak to that world, and in hopes that he might save Christianity from what seems to be its demise. And I think in the process, maybe he lets go of some the kind of language that I think you're referencing there in that question he asked, which is sort of a demystifying question, right? Is that what it was for you? It was sort of he demystified the relic a little bit and sort of dared to question whether it had any magic stardust on it or not.
I think he's trying to preserve what can be preserved. I think there's more that isn't in danger. He's got his finger on the pulse of many modern Christians, and so I'd let him do that. For all the people for whom that's good. It just didn't seem like a complete spectrum of what is within Christianity.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm just learning about him. So
the reason I called on Michael is he's been sending me these eloquent, gorgeous emails, and I can't wait to get to know you better, Michael. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any thoughts that they want to share as we close this 5-week session? If not, I'm going to hand it over to our beloved Reverend Chris Bell for closing. Liz? No.
No, I was just, I've got to go
Yeah.
check on Dave
Yeah.
here in a minute, but no, I really resonate with Richard Rohr. I really liked what he has to say. I love his great expansiveness and, you know, his inclusion of so many things that really resonates with the Native American spirituality that I've studied just a little bit. So I really enjoyed the book, and I really enjoyed your class, Matthew. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you. All right. I'm going to hand this over to our brother, Reverend Chris Bell. Do you want to see the screen with the candle on it, or do you care?
No, I'd rather see everybody.
Okay, that sounds good to me. I spent hours on that screen, man.
We'll look at it later at home. Together. And it's all right if I remove my mask up here?
Yes.
Just, that'll help. I know the folks on Zoom in particular to be able to understand me. Hello, thank you. Just before I lead us in our meditation, which will be the words of Rohr himself from the very conclusion of the book, which seems like an apt way to wrap things up, I just want to thank you for letting me be a part of this. And thank you to my friend Matt for keeping my toes in the religion game. Along the way, I did find this book that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. Oh, the camera's all the way up there. I was pointing it at the computer, and it is called Everything is Sacred: 40 Practices and Reflections on the Universal Christ. And I had sort of hoped that one of them would fit for our contemplative time, but most of them involve like some journaling and some extended reflection, and they really do seem a little more fit for one's own practice, even just at the kitchen table. But check it out. If you're liking what you've been hearing here about his perspectives, that could greatly deepen the experience. So here at the very end of the book, beyond mere theology, 2 practices. This was the one of simply being, simply that you are. At Descartesian insight, you are actually here and having this experience. And then the other one was to treat and see all physical reality as a mirror of our own self, of God's self. And by embracing that, become aware that everything finally belongs and you are a part of it. And to lead us to that state of feeling united with all things, with our own self and with the sacred self, he crafted this meditation called the Divine Mirror, which is actually an image in Zen as well for the pure form of awareness that is everything. It is a mirror. And we're reflected in it. It reflects us. And that relationship is our being. And he is bold enough to claim at the end of this meditation that after hearing it and receiving it, you need never be lonely again. So that's good news. So I'm just going to read it, and I invite you to sit. And I think that for this one, our eyes should be open, because he has repeatedly claimed that Christ's nature is visible in all things. It is the nature of all things. We're it, you're it. Here it is. You in your actual body with all the choices you made in your life that got you to this very chair, wherever you are right now, and this very space. This is the mirror in question. So with eyes open. A mirror receives and reflects back what it sees. It does not judge, adjust, or write commentary. We are the ones who do that. A mirror simply reveals and invites responsibility. A mirror, the sun, and God are all the same. They are all there, fully shining forth. Their very nature is light, love, and infinite giving. You can't offend them or make them stop shining. You can only choose to stop receiving and enjoying. As soon as you look, you will see they are there and fully radiating, and always have been. Their message is constant, good, and life-giving. There are only the lookers and the non-lookers, those who receive and those who do not receive. When we learn to love anyone or anything, it is because they have somehow, if just for a moment, mirrored us truthfully yet compassionately to ourselves. And we grab onto it. Why wouldn't we? In this resonance, we literally come to life. Have no doubt it is an allowing from our side. Pure, unfiltered presence is accessed only by presence in return. Nothing more is needed. Presence comes to us from Christ's side, and then presence from our side knows what it needs to know. If that mirror is withdrawn for any reason, it causes sadness, emptiness, anger. We are normally disoriented, even heartbroken for a while. We die in some way. But why? Because we only truly know ourselves in another's eyes. The other both creates us and saves us. No one is an island entire of itself. This is what we call the pure gift of holiness. Or if you prefer, wholeness. We are always a giving, a resonance, never a possession of our own. The universe is relational at every level, and even between levels. Relationship is the core and foundational shape of reality, mirroring our God. Every object serves as a mirror, another kind of presence. You can find such mirrors in all of nature, in animals, in your parents, lovers, children, books, pictures, movies, and even in what some call God. Remember, God is just a word for reality with a face. God is a mirror big enough to receive everything and every single part of you, just as it is, rejecting nothing, adjusting nothing. God is a mirror big enough to receive everything and every single part of you, just as it is, rejecting nothing, adjusting nothing. For the sake of an even deeper love, we will experience a universal forgiveness, a divine sympathy for all of reality, what some have called the divine pity, and it will fall even on us. Whatever is fully received in this mirror is redeemed. And all is received, whether we believe it or not. You do not have to see the sun to know that it is still shining. If your divine mirror cannot fully receive you in this way, then it is certainly not God. Remember that regret profits nobody. Shame is useless. Blame is surely a waste of time. All hatred is a diversionary tactic, a dead end. God always sees and loves God in you. God has no choice. This is God's eternal and unilateral contract with the soul. Allow yourself to be fully mirrored in this way. Know who you are. Enjoy who you are. Know the heart of God. Any loving gaze that we can dare to receive can start the flow. Creation itself, animals, humans, all are the divine gaze if we allow them to be. The knowledge that I once had was imperfect, but then I shall know as fully as I am known, we read. One day the mirror will reflect in both directions, and we will see over there what was allowed in here. This is full access seeing and being seen. We name it heaven, and it begins now. Let the divine mirror fully receive you, all of you. And may none of us ever be lonely again. Amen. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Thank you, all of you, for your gorgeous presence during this class, for your wonderful questions and comments. And I love you all. Thank you and good night.